The signal turned green. Dispatch said there was no train. The third time it came through, it was slow enough to stop. It didn't stop. But someone in the cab was already looking at me. I need to go back to the beginning. That's where the shape starts. Every detail matters. When something like this happens, you spend weeks turning each moment over in your hands, looking for the crack where normal ended. I've been doing that, going back through my notes, checking timestamps, trying to find the exact point of entry. I don't think there is one. I think it was already there when I arrived. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was alone, the only person on that shift for 6 miles in any direction, and I found the list. I took the position in late October. Night signal operator, Gallup West substation, Gallup, New Mexico. Temporary contract, 6 months minimum. The listing had been posted for almost 3 months before I found it. At the time, I read that as luck, an opportunity that had waited for the right person. I understand it differently now. The pay was enough. I'd been between things for a while, between jobs and cities, and whatever version of myself I was still deciding to become, and solitary night work in the desert sounded like the kind of quiet I needed. I drove in on a Sunday. The last 20 minutes of the drive, once you clear the edge of Gallup proper and swing south toward the old rail yard, the landscape opens in a way that hits the body before the mind catches up. The mesa flattens. The sky becomes enormous. The road straightens and goes on. The feeling that settles into your chest isn't loneliness. It's smallness. The specific smallness of something being watched by a thing that has no name for you. The Gallup West substation wasn't on any map I could find online. The company sent me a hand-drawn diagram with the official paperwork, a single page, photocopied until the lines went soft, showing the access road off Highway 602, the chain link perimeter, the signal tower, the control building. No satellite image, no street view, nothing. The access road looked like a fire road. Gravel and packed caliche cutting west through scrubby desert brush. I followed it for half a mile before the station appeared, and my first impression was that it had been left behind by accident. The platform was still standing, but clearly unused. The paint on the covered waiting area had chalked and peeled. The wooden benches were split and warped. A rusted water tower stood on the east side of the yard, dry for years. The rails themselves were active, 2 main lines running east-west, plus sidings that branched toward a loading facility now reduced to corrugated metal, slowly coming apart in the wind. But the signal infrastructure was operational. The mast signals along both lines were functional. The relay boxes were wired and live. The control building, squat, flat-roofed concrete, about the size of a double-wide trailer, had working power, working communications, and a bank of monitoring equipment that was probably 20 years old but maintained with obvious care. My supervisor, a man named Garrett, who I only ever spoke to by phone, told me the substation was what he called a legacy node. It had been on the company's active maintenance schedule since 1987, when surrounding operations consolidated and most staff were reassigned. The signal systems at Gallup West stayed running because of through traffic on the two main lines, east-west freight routes still carrying coal, grain, potash from the mines further south. My job was to monitor signal integrity through the night, log all passing traffic, report anomalies to dispatch, and maintain the relay equipment according to the service checklist. He told me I'd be alone, plainly, without apology. One operator covered the day shift, a woman named Terry who I'd overlap with briefly during handoffs, but nights were solo. He gave me numbers for dispatch, the maintenance line, himself for genuine emergencies. He hoped I was a good reader, he said, because the nights were long and the traffic was light. Then he hung up. The first handoff with Terry was brief. She was a compact woman in her 50s, weathered in the specific way that desert people get, sun-creased skin, very steady eyes. She showed me the control board, the relay panel, the logging system. Paper logs, not digital. She showed me the coffee maker, the emergency radio, the flashlight drawer. She did not mention the list. When she was done, she paused at the door and looked at me for a moment. I asked if there was anything else I should know. She said the nights were quiet. Just that. No inflection. Then she left, and I heard her truck start, and I watched the headlights swing east and disappear down the gravel road. The desert settled back into itself. The relay equipment hummed. I mention the hum because it becomes the baseline of everything that follows. Constant, low, sitting somewhere between a refrigerator and a fluorescent bulb, cycling without pause. Within the first hour, the brain reclassifies it as silence because it never stops. But it was always there, underneath everything else. The bass note of a piece of music you don't realize you've been hearing until the note changes. The first 4 nights were unremarkable. Monitoring, logging, the occasional freight train appearing on the eastern horizon as a point of light slowly growing into the grind and weight of moving steel. 2 or 3 trains on average, none at all on the quiet nights. The desert at that hour was something I hadn't prepared for. Not the darkness, but the texture of the silence inside it. Wind through brush. The groan of the relay tower when a gust hit the right angle. Something animal, far off, that I could never identify. All of it layered beneath the equipment hum I'd stopped consciously registering by the end of the first week. I didn't find the list until my 5th night. I'd been exploring the control building. There wasn't much to explore. One main room with the control panel and relay board along the far wall, a small bathroom, a supply closet, and a narrow secondary room that had once been a supervisor's office and was now used for storage. Filing cabinets, old maintenance binders, a broken chair, a metal shelf holding replacement fuses and signal lamp bulbs in their original cardboard packaging. Most of the binders were standard operational documentation, but one had a piece of masking tape on the spine with 2 handwritten words. Night Protocol. I pulled it out, carried it to the main room, and opened it under the overhead light. Most of it was expected. Additional procedures specific to the night shift, largely repetitive with the official documentation I'd already been given. I read through without much engagement until I reached the last section. No header. The previous sections had clear, typewritten title pages. This final section was a single page, handwritten in neat, careful block lettering. Blue ink. The controlled printing of someone who needs something read correctly the first time. The page said, Rules for Night Operation. 1. All trains passing through the yard must be logged. Log time, direction, consist type if visible, and confirm against the dispatch schedule. If a train is not on the dispatch schedule, set all signals to red immediately and do not touch them until the train has cleared the yard entirely. 2. If the yard lights activate on their own between the hours of 1 and 4 in the morning, do not go outside. The exterior lighting system on the east side of the yard runs on a separate circuit from the control building. If those lights come on without manual activation, stay inside, close the windows, and wait. 3. The radio will sometimes produce sound on channel 7 that does not correspond to any dispatch transmission. Do not respond to it. Do not tune away from it. Let it finish. 4. If you hear a train approaching but nothing appears on the signal monitoring panel, note the time and do nothing else. 5. Do not count the cars on an unscheduled train. 6. If, after an unscheduled train has passed, the relay panel shows a signal status inconsistent with what you observed during passage, log it and do not adjust the panel manually. Leave everything as it is and call the maintenance line. 7. If you see someone on the platform, stay inside. No signature, no date, no explanation. I sat with that page for a long time. Every workplace accumulates unofficial documentation, procedures that exist because something happened once that the official manual didn't cover. A previous operator had written this down for whoever came next. The question was whether whoever came next was meant to take it seriously. I photographed the page before putting the binder back. Read it twice more from my phone before the shift ended. Rule 5 was the one I kept returning to. The others had some operational logic buried inside the strangeness. But do not count the cars on an unscheduled train had no operational purpose whatsoever. Counting cars wasn't part of standard logging procedure. There was no reason to single it out unless the act of counting meant something. Unless counting them did something. At the next morning's handoff, I mentioned the binder as casually as I could. Asked Terry about the handwritten page, the rules, the section about unscheduled trains. She didn't look at me. She looked at the relay panel. Then she did look at me, and something shifted in her eyes. A quality of careful attention, like someone listening for something specific inside what you're saying. She said all trains on this route were scheduled and logged through dispatch, and that I should follow the official documentation for all traffic management. I said, of course, just wanted to flag it. She nodded, said to have a good sleep. On the 7th night, the radio did something strange. Around 1 in the morning, Channel 7 produced a sound that made me look up from my book. Not static. Static is random, undirected. This had structure. Low, with a rhythm. Slow and even, cycling at the interval of deep, deliberate breathing. The squelch light was active, meaning the unit was receiving an actual signal from somewhere. My hand moved toward the tuning dial. Then I remembered Rule 3. I left the dial alone and sat and listened. 11 minutes. Then it stopped. The squelch light went dark. I wrote it down and sat back in the sudden quiet. The feeling wasn't fear, not exactly. It was closer to hearing your name spoken in an empty room. That electrical alertness before the mind finishes deciding whether what you heard was real. 2 nights later, Rule 2 became relevant. October 28th. Around 1:45 in the morning, the yard lights came on. Not all of them, just the sodium vapor lights along the east side of the yard, above the platform and the old waiting area. Exactly the separate circuit Rule 2 had described. Amber light through the east windows, long shadows on the floor. The platform was empty. The rails gleamed. I pulled every window shut and went back to my desk. 20 minutes of nothing. Then, at approximately 2:15, I saw something on the platform. Not a figure. Not in the way that word implies something definite and resolved. A change in the quality of shadow under the waiting area canopy. A specific pooling of darkness that hadn't been there before. Dense. Still. Occupying exactly the space a person would occupy if they were standing very still and didn't want to be seen. Sodium vapor light is a distorting light, poor at resolving detail at distance. I reminded myself of this. My attention was pulled briefly to the relay panel, which produced a clicking sound. When I looked back at the platform, the shadow under the canopy was uniform again. The yard lights went off at 2:51. I wrote everything down with the steady handwriting of someone performing calm as a deliberate method. The easy skepticism I'd been carrying was gone. The rules had described specific conditions, and those specific conditions had begun occurring in sequence, in the order they were listed. Rule 7 acquired new weight. If you see someone on the platform, stay inside. I had already been inside. But the specificity of that rule, the precision of the scenario it anticipated, now felt like something written by someone who had needed to tell themselves the same thing out loud before they trusted themselves to follow it. 3 quiet nights followed. 2 more Channel 7 transmissions, 8 and 15 minutes respectively. I let both run. On the second one, sitting very still, I thought I could hear something inside the primary rhythm. A counter rhythm, faster and irregular, layered underneath, communicating in a register I didn't have the equipment to parse. Then came November 3rd. On shift since 9. 1 confirmed freight, due at 2:45. I made coffee, settled in with a novel. At 12:58, the signal panel made a sound I hadn't heard before. Not an alarm. A rapid series of clicks. A relay cycling through states in quick succession. Mechanically wrong. Relays are designed to shift and hold, not cycle. The signal status board was showing a westbound approach signal at green. Mast W3 approximately 2 miles east, the signal that transitions to green when a train is detected in that block. Nothing on the dispatch schedule for another 1 hour and 45 minutes. I keyed dispatch and asked for confirmation of any westbound traffic in the eastern approach corridor. The response came back negative. I told him W3 was showing green with no logged traffic. He said it was probably a relay fault, a ghost reading. Note it, flag it for Thursday maintenance. Track circuits are triggered by the electrical resistance of steel wheels on rails, a direct physical mechanism. It doesn't produce false positives. If W3 was reading green, something with steel wheels was on those rails 2 miles east. I entered the manual override code. The board went red. Every signal, both main lines, all directions. The mechanical sound of distant signals physically rotating to stop carried through even inside the building. A series of faint, sequential thunks transmitted through the infrastructure. W3 remained active. I tried the maintenance line. 8 rings, nothing. Tried Garrett. Straight to voicemail. I turned off the desk lamp. The interior light had been reflecting in the windows, making it impossible to see outside. With the lamp off, the only light in the room was the dim red glow of the relay panel indicators. The yard became visible. Rails and platform faintly lit by starlight and the distant bleed of highway lights to the north. I watched the eastern approach. At 103, the light appeared. Far end of the corridor, at the limit of visibility. A single faint point. I told myself it was a vehicle on the access road. I watched it grow, not in a rush, in the measured expansion of something at distance, becoming something real. 2 points becoming a wide, pale wash of light spreading across the rails ahead of it. No sound yet. The desert absorbs the sound of an approaching train at distance for a long time before it reaches you. At 107, I felt it in the floor before I heard it. Low-frequency tremor through the chair, my legs, earlier than any previous train had started it, which meant this one was moving fast. Fast and heavy. The light filled the eastern approach. The window frames began to rattle. The locomotive appeared at the eastern yard limit at 112, and everything I had been rationalizing stopped. The cab style, the body profile, the nose design all belonged to a class of road freight locomotive retired from active service decades before. Museum pieces, not on active routes, not on any dispatch schedule anywhere. The paint was a deep green so dark it was almost black, catching light differently than true black would. No visible road number on the cab side, moving well above yard limit. The headlamps swept the platform and flooded the control building windows. The sound hit its full peak. The rolling weight of the engine, the rhythmic percussion of wheel trucks crossing rail joints, and underneath all of it, a sustained, single-note horn. I felt behind my sternum before my ears processed it. Not the modern, high-low blast. Something longer, more even. A sound with age in it. Not age as decay, but age as depth. As if the note had been vibrating long enough to wear grooves in the air around it. The cars began to pass. Dark, unmarked, moving too fast to resolve. I thought of Rule 5. Do not count the cars on an unscheduled train. I had not intended to count. But the human brain begins counting passing objects without deliberate intent. By the time I caught myself, I was at 7. I looked away from the window, walked to the back wall, put my back against it, and faced the relay panel. The count continued underneath everything anyway, silent and automatic, like a clock running in a room I'd left. I reached 31 before the sound began to fade. I turned back to the window. The western approach was empty, dark and still. I checked the wall clock. 1:17. 5 minutes. Block detection cleared. I called dispatch and reported the passage. The dispatcher went quiet, asked me to repeat the time, put me on hold. 4 minutes. He came back with a different quality in his voice, more careful. He said there was no record in the network traffic management system of any train passing my corridor at 1:12 or 1:17. I asked what that meant operationally. He said maintenance would check the equipment Thursday. I put the phone down, checked every window. The one in the storage room was slightly open. I pulled it shut and latched it. Then I sat back down and wrote everything in my personal log, every detail in sequence, with times. At the end of the entry, I wrote the number 31. The entry around it was mine, its natural variation, the specific lean of my letters. But the number itself, written as a word, was in different handwriting, smaller, neater, the same careful block print as the night protocol page. I closed the log, placed it precisely on the desk, looked at the relay panel. My hands were steady. I'm including that because it mattered to me. The fear had gone very deep and very quiet, the kind that bypasses the part of you that panics and reaches something more fundamental. But my hands were steady. I stayed at the desk until dawn. Terry arrived. I gave her the briefest handoff I'd managed and left. I pulled over on the long, straight stretch of 602 where the desert opens on both sides. Sat there long enough for 2 trucks to pass in opposite directions, each briefly filling the car with noise and leaving the silence more complete by contrast. I went back because I had a contract and needed the money. Because leaving on the basis of an old locomotive no dispatcher could confirm would have sounded, in any conversation I tried to have about it, like the justification of someone coming apart. And because the rules had been written by someone who had sat in that room and experienced specific things and survived clearly enough to write the rules down and file them for the next person. That meant the rules worked. That meant there was a way through. The 6th and 7th nights were quiet enough to allow a cautious reconstruction of skepticism. A relay fault. An older consist that had come through the system unlogged. Strange, but not necessarily what the rules implied. I was almost settled again by the time I arrived for the 8th shift to find the relay panel already showing signal states that didn't match the track layout. 2 signals red when they should have been green, one showing a flashing indication corresponding to no standard state in my documentation. I pulled the night protocol binder from storage and brought it to my desk. I read the handwritten page again. All 7 rules in sequence. This time, I read them not as operational guidelines, but as what they actually were. Testimony. Someone had been in this room, in this chair, and had experienced specific things and written down what to do with the precision of someone who had already failed to follow the correct procedure at least once. Who had seen what failure produced? I thought about Rule 1, setting signals to red. The train had come through anyway. It hadn't stopped or slowed. The signals weren't meant to stop it. They were a ritual, not a procedure, a formal acknowledgement. Here is a thing that exists. We are registering its existence in the correct, neutral manner. We are not ignoring it, and we are not pretending it is something it is not. And Rule 5, that was about what happened when you gave the train your full, sequential attention. The act of counting was an invitation. And someone had accepted the invitation on my behalf and recorded the result in my log in handwriting that wasn't mine. 2 more Channel 7 transmissions followed over the next quiet nights, the second running 19 minutes, the longest I'd recorded. When it ended, the silence that settled had a different texture. Not a quality I can explain precisely. Like air after something large has moved through it and hasn't yet fully closed. Then, the night of the cycling lights. I arrived at 9. The relay panel was already showing the flashing indicator when I walked in. Made coffee. Reviewed the dispatch schedule. 1 overnight freight, eastbound, due at 3:15. At 11:40, Channel 7 started. 19 minutes again, and this time the counter rhythm I'd heard before was more distinct. Faster, irregular, layered inside the primary pattern. I wrote that down. At 12:01, the yard lights began to cycle. Not a simple on-off. Patterns. East section, then west, then the platform group, then east again. Sequential and irregular. The amber light through the windows moving in slow, inconsistent rhythms that filled the room with shifting shadows. Simultaneously, the relay panel began cycling states, green to red to flashing to red to green, sweeping east to west along both lines like a wave. And as I watched, the pattern resolved into structure. Click, pause, click, click, pause, click. 1, 2, 2, 1. Repeating without variation. I tried dispatch. The line was active, but no one answered. Maintenance rang 8 times and stopped. I tried Garrett. 1 ring, then a sound that was neither pickup nor disconnect. Brief and almost organic. And then silence. I put the phone down. The yard lights cut to full off. Complete darkness outside. The relay panel's red glow was the only light source in the building. I did not turn the lamp on. The vibration reached the floor at 1:02. Not gradually, immediately. Full intensity. No building approach. One moment still, the next moment the floor resonating at that deep, specific frequency. The sound followed in seconds, not from a distance, already at full volume, as if the acoustic rules that governed normal trains didn't apply in the same way tonight. Then the horn. That single, even sustained note. Close enough that I felt it inside my chest before my ears processed it. Then the light swept across the east windows, and the train was barely moving. Walking pace. The kind of speed at which you can see things clearly if you choose to look. Same unit. Same aged profile. Same deep paint. Same absent road number. Running lights in their housings. Cab windows catching the ambient glow of the yard. As the locomotive drew level with the control building, the angle aligned perfectly. Cab window facing my window. Approximately 30 feet between us. There were two figures in the cab. A seated figure at the operator's position, hands visible on the panel. And behind it, standing, a second figure. Not shapes I was interpreting as people. Silhouettes, distinct and separate, caught in the amber instrument glow of the cab interior. The standing figure was turned toward the window, toward the control building. As the cab drew level and began to pass, I had approximately 4 seconds of clear angle, backlit by the instrument panel, so I could not see its face. But its orientation was unmistakable. It didn't look surprised to see me. It looked like it had been expecting me. My chair was pushed back before I consciously decided to move. I pressed myself against the back wall and stood there and listened to the rest of the train pass. The cars moved at that same slow, patient pace. Close enough now for me to hear things the higher speed had swallowed before. The creak of the truck assemblies, the subtle harmonics of the car bodies. And underneath those mechanical sounds, coming from inside the cars themselves, a rhythm. Low, slow, even. Not cargo shifting, not undercarriage noise. Something with intention in its regularity, cycling at the same interval as the Channel 7 transmission, coming from each car as it passed, one after another, sustained and consistent from one end of the consist to the other. The same rhythm. Car after car after car. I kept my back against the wall and my eyes on the relay panel, and I counted my own breaths to keep the automatic mechanism occupied and away from the cars. By 38, the rhythm outside had begun to recede. The vibration decreased. The last car passed the east windows and the yard returned to silence. I looked at the relay panel. W3 was showing green on a board that should have been in manual red. I had not touched the controls. The override was still engaged. The system status confirmed manual control active. W3 was green. I wrote it down without touching the panel, exactly as Rule 6 required. Called dispatch when I could move. Reported the passage. Time. Direction. Duration. She said she'd flag it for operations review. I asked if this had happened before at the station. She said she wouldn't have that historical data available from her position. I put the phone down. The rest of the shift was the quietest the station had ever been. Not the ordinary quiet of a slow night. The quality of a room after something significant has happened in it. A silence that knows what it replaced. At 4:41, the east yard lights came on a final time. Steady, not cycling. I watched the platform through the closed window. Clean amber light. Empty concrete. But the overnight frost that had settled on every surface in the yard was disturbed on the bench nearest the waiting area. Compressed in two specific areas, roughly symmetrical, approximately the size and shape of things that had pressed down from above. The shape of feet standing still. I watched those marks until the yard lights took them with them into the dark. Terry arrived at 9. She looked at me when she came in and held the look a moment longer than usual. I told her about the W3 inconsistency, the east yard lights. Then I said, "How long has this been happening?" She looked at the relay panel for a long time before she answered. She said, "Since they closed the old corridor." That's what I was told. I asked who told her. She said the operator before her. Who was told by the operator before him? I asked if anyone had ever understood what it was. She said she didn't think anyone had tried. She said the rules had always been enough. I said, "Have they been enough?" She looked at me. Something in her face that wasn't quite sorrow and wasn't quite warning. Something that had settled there over years. Some accommodation made with a fact that wasn't going to change regardless of accommodation. She said, "You're still here." I picked up my bag. She said, without turning from the panel, "Don't go to the platform." I hadn't been going to the platform. I walked to my car and drove east until the station was gone from the mirror. That was 11 days ago. I haven't been back. I told the company there was a family situation. Garrett called. I didn't answer. I have the photograph of the night protocol page on my phone. 7 rules in careful block print, written by someone who sat in that building, in that chair, and survived. Survived clearly enough to file those rules for the next person. But they left too. Everyone left. And the train kept coming. What I keep returning to is the standing figure in the cab window. The calculation of it. Knowing which specific window to look at, in a dark room, at distance, from a moving cab. That isn't chance. That is something that knows the building. That has studied it from the rails across the yard, from the approach, from each pass. That has been doing this long enough to know exactly where to look for the person inside. First pass. Too fast to see into the cab. Second pass, fast enough to remain ambiguous. Third pass, slow enough, clear enough. Someone at the window, looking back, not passing anymore, measuring the distance. The only logical progression from walking pace is a stop. I don't know what Rule 7 was written to protect against in its most specific form. Why the rule assumes you'll need to be told to stay inside. Why it anticipates that what you'll want to do when you see something on the platform will be something other than remaining in the building. I only know it was written by someone who understood that impulse from direct experience. Someone who had already moved toward the door before they caught themselves. I left before the fourth pass. But the train doesn't stop because I left. It doesn't recalibrate or redirect because one operator broke a contract and drove east on I-40 in the gray early morning without looking back. The train runs its corridor, has been running it since long before I arrived, and will keep running it long after I've convinced myself this is something I can eventually stop thinking about. Somewhere west of where I'm sitting right now, the desert is cold and dark, and the Gallup West substation is running its shift. The relay panel is humming. The wall clock is moving. Someone is in that chair with their coffee and their book, and the quiet that is not quite silence. And at some point tonight, W3 is going to light up green, and whoever is sitting in that chair will enter the override code, set everything to red, pick up the dispatch phone, hear the floor begin to vibrate, and the train will appear at the eastern yard limit. And this time, it won't be at walking pace before it reaches the yard. This time, it will already be stopped. The figure that was at the cab window won't have 30 feet of yard between it and the building. Stay inside. Close the windows. Follow the rules. The rules have always been enough. But enough only ever meant surviving the shift. It never meant the thing outside the glass was finished. It never meant the approach had an end. Each pass slower. Each pass closer. Each pass more certain of exactly where to look. Something that patient doesn't need an invitation. It's already past that. It's just waiting for the moment when the distance left isn't enough for a door to matter. I left before the fourth pass. I keep telling myself that was the right decision. Every night, I'm less certain.